Hi, and welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude. Today I'm going to start the next video series in my Plastic Models for Beginners videos. I want to say first right off the bat, this is going to be a very back to basics, very beginner oriented video. So if you're more advanced or whatever, you may see or hear something that's helpful. Or you may not, but I really want to focus on beginners in this kit because I haven't done an aircraft strictly in the beginner style. So the kit this time is going to be the Tamiya Grumman F4F-4 in 1/48 scale, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. But again, the objective is to go back to basics, so I'm going to discuss what kind of tools and supplies we're going to need for the kit, and then I'll talk about the kit as well and what the plan is. So let's go ahead and take a look at tools first. Okay, so first off, let me show you what the box looks like of the kit, and then we'll get into the tools and stuff. This is the kit we're going to be building. So if a person wants to follow along and do this kit, this is the kit I'm using in this case. So if you want to step by step, this is the way to go. So as far as tools, I'm going to keep it pretty basic, but it's not going to be the most basic tools like I mentioned in one of my earlier videos of what the bare minimum is to build a kit. I'm going to talk about basic tools. And if you plan on sticking with the hobby any length of time, the tools I'm going to show are ones that you'll use over and over again and that I would recommend that you get. Now, everybody's got their own style and their own way of doing things, so some people may add or subtract tools according to their needs. And I've got a lot more tools I'm going to show here, but again, I'm trying to keep it basic. So the first thing, and probably the most common thing you'll see, is a hobby knife. And in this case, this is an X-Acto knife. I actually have two because I like to keep another blade in it, a different type of blade for doing different things. But you only need one. The number 11 blade is the most common, and that's the one I'll be using for this build. And it doesn't have to be an X-Acto knife, any type of knife to use for cutting parts off of the sprues or smoothing seam lines, stuff like that. The other thing that's a pretty good thing to have is sprue cutters, and there's different types. These are Tamiya brand, this is Xuron brand, and they both work pretty well. I prefer this type just because it's super flat on one side and it makes it a lot easier to cut parts off the sprue. So sprue cutters. Next thing is tweezers. Any tweezers will do. I would suggest something kind of solid, not too springy, and with as good a tips as you can get. And you can buy some really inexpensive sets that have really good tips on them. Like this is a really cheap set I bought at Harbor Freight, which is a tool supply here in town. And they're really good tweezers. I mean, they have really sharp. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on tweezers. Just take a look at the tips and make sure they're ground really nice. That way it hangs on to parts better and less chance of losing parts due to them flying out the tip because, the tweezers aren't gripping them. So anyway, we got tweezers. Then some sanders. Now, these are the type of sanders I use pretty much for all things. These are by Ultimate Modeling Products, but other companies make them as well. They're a soft foam, not too coarse in grit. One side is a little bit smoother than the other. And these are especially good for getting curved surfaces. Allows you to sand, like say, a seam line without making a flat spot. So I'm going to be using this type here. You can also buy these types in hobby stores, or you can get these like this one. You can buy them at pharmacies or beauty supplies or even hobby stores. They're a little bit soft, but they're a little more rigid, so it's good for sanding flat surfaces. And then for smaller areas, I like to use these small stick types. They come in fine, medium, coarse, and coarser. So sanders. And then the last thing I want to talk about is an airbrush. And I'm not going to get into all the different kinds of airbrushes or anything like that, but I will be using an airbrush on this kit. I have two airbrushes. One is this single action that I mainly use for spraying primers, base coats, stuff like that. It's very good. It's an Iwata brand, HP M2 single action. Works really well, easy to get parts for, and they're not very expensive. The other airbrush I have is a trigger style double action. And again, I don't want to get too deep into all this, but you know, double action, basically you have the air is on, and the more you pull or push the trigger, in some cases, the more common type has a trigger up here that you turn on the air and then slide back to control the paint flow. If you can only buy one airbrush, I would suggest getting a double action airbrush. Also, gravity feed with the cup on top instead of coming off the bottom or the side is a little bit better, in my opinion, because it doesn't take as much air to suck the paint up as it does for gravity just to let it flow through. But a good double action airbrush would be the way to go. If you can afford more, or if you just want to like monkeying around with different types, then go for it. But good double action is pretty much can do everything you need. You can spray primers, paints, clear coats, whatever you want. So I'll also be using an airbrush. So that's pretty much all the tools, except for one more tool that I want to talk about. And this is purely optional. I'm just bringing it up because, you know, some people may not know about them. But it is a stand used for aircraft. And all of these are adjustable this way and in height. And it allows you to, especially, you know, as you're building, it allows you to have a nice solid base, because if, you know, you can adjust it to where the wings are supported, where there's no movement at all, so you can put small parts on, you can do detail painting, you can do decals, whatever, and it's pretty helpful, but by no means necessary. I just wanted to bring that up, so if you see me break it out, you'll know what it is. But I'm going to try and avoid using this for those who choose not to have one. I may demonstrate, you know, some of the benefits of it, but I still want to keep it as basic as possible. So that's pretty much the tools and stuff that we'll need. So let's take a look at some of the supplies. Okay, for supplies, you're going to need cement of some kind. Now there's different types, and I'll probably be using two different types. For most of the work I do, I use Tamiya Extra Thin. Now, you don't have to use Tamiya. You can use something like Testers, liquid cement for plastic, something real liquidy and fluid. And I'll describe the benefit of that, you know, while building the model, because, you know, I'll be talking about stuff as I'm doing it. But it works really well, bonds the parts really well, and it's pretty, between this one and this one, you can find those just about anywhere if you have any kind of hobby or craft type stores. So we'll need that. Another type I use is Model Master liquid cement, which is a little bit thicker than that. And the benefit of this is, like, if you're putting a part in place and you can't really hold them together while you use this, which again I'll demonstrate later, you can use this, and it has a nice little applicator tip to apply the cement to the part you need or to the base or whatever. Then you can put the part in place, and you can manipulate it and move it into the position it needs to be before it sets up. So this is a little bit thicker, and it dries just a little bit slower, but it gives you time to work. So say if you're putting a part on the kit that's supposed to be upright, you know, you put it like this and this sets up, it's going to be crooked. Now it's fixable, but with something like this, it gives you a little bit of time to get it straight, hold it in position for a sec, and let it go. And if it kind of drifts, as it cures, you can just push it into place, and it'll be fine. So those are the two cements that I'm going to use. Another thing to have, especially when building aircraft, is putty. And there are different types of putty, and these are the three that I have. This is glazing and spot putty, which can be found at auto parts stores, home improvement centers, hardware stores, stuff like that. This works really well. It's kind of thick. It's a lacquer-based, solvent-based type stuff, so it really digs into the plastic and you know, does a good job of filling. The other type I have is Tamiya basic type putty, and it's the gray type. There's also a white type. I've never used the white type, but I've heard it's a little grittier than the gray. This is good for filling small spots and stuff like that. The only problem you can have sometimes with some of the solvent-based putties is if you have two parts together like this, and if there's any kind of a gap, you put it in there. Once it cures, it can kind of settle down into that gap, so you need to apply more until you can get that gap, you know, at the height that needs to be via sanding. So good putty, but not quite as easy to use as some other putties, but it does work well. Then the one I've discovered I like the most for aircraft, because it's usually long seams that need to be handled, is Vallejo plastic putty. Now this is an acrylic resin, so it's kind of water cleanup. So when you use this, you put it in, you know, you can put it, just squirt it right along a seam line. Then you can wet your finger or a Q-tip or cotton bud, whatever you want to call them, and just wipe right along the edge, and it wipes it smooth with the surface. When it dries, it's there. It's easy to clean up, and it's easy to use, and it does a good job in gaps. So we may not have to use this, but this is something I recommend you have on hand just in case. Next is a type of glue for the canopy. So canopies are generally made of clear parts, and if you use super glue sometimes, you know, or one of those type of cyanoacrylate glues, it can cause fogging on the canopy or any of the clear parts. So any glue that dries clear will work. This is Model Master Clear Part Cement, and it's kind of milky looking, but it dries perfectly clear, and it works really well for windshields and stuff like that, because again, it has this really nice applicator tip, so you can get it right where you want it. Another type of glue that works well is Gator's Grip acrylic hobby glue. It's a really thick glue that dries clear, and it stays somewhat flexible. And then good old Elmer's school glue. I'm not sure if this is common in other countries, but in the United States, it's like in almost every kid's desk at school, especially in the lower grades, and that dries clear as well. So anything like that to glue the canopy and the windscreen onto the kit will work good. So after that, we're also going to need paints. Now I'll talk about the paints a little bit when we get to the instructions, but what you'll want to do is pick out a type of paint, and if you use paint already, use whatever you're comfortable with. I prefer Tamiya brand paints for using in the airbrush. Then I use Vallejo Model Color and Vallejo Model Air for all of my brush painting needs. The Model Color is a little bit thicker. You have to thin it, and you just use a regular paintbrush and paint it on. This is already pre-thinned for airbrush, but I like using it with a brush. So you'll just want to pick your paint and get the appropriate colors, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Let's see. You'll also need thinner and cleaner to match the type of paint you're using. If you're using an acrylic, a water-based acrylic, you'll want to use, you can use water, or you can use any number of cleaners, branded cleaners. There's, you know, Vallejo, for instance, they have their own cleaner and thinner. I would recommend those for use with the Vallejo paints. For Tamiya, I use X20A, which is the acrylic thinner. There's also another type of Tamiya thinner that is lacquer based, and that's really smelly, so I like to use this stuff. So just get a thinner that matches your type of paint. As for cleaner, I use exclusively lacquer thinner, and the reason I do is because it works on all type of paints. It doesn't hurt the airbrush in any way. It doesn't hurt paintbrushes in any way, and it's good for cleaning all different types of paints, and it does a really good job. Then you'll need some decal fluids. So most commonly there are two types of fluids for decals. There's a setting solution for putting the decal in place, and then there's a solvent for putting on after the decal's in place to help it conform to surface detail, whether it's recessed or protruding. I use Tamiya Mark Fit for my setting solution. Put a little bit on, slide the decal in place, mash out any extra liquid, make sure it's on the surface of the model really well. Once that dries up a little bit, then I use Solvaset, put that on top to allow the decal to really settle into the detail. There is Microsol, and Microset is another brand. There's all kinds of brands. Just find one that works for you. Then you'll need some masking tape. The masking tape is for masking for painting, and there's different types. I use the Tamiya brand masking tape for most of my masking needs, but there's also just regular painter's tape. I would suggest kind of a medium grip or a soft, or I don't know, less adhesive grip. Like this one is the least adhesive as far as the brand that I use, which is Frog brand. But just any painter's tape will work. You just need to be careful and test it with whatever paint you're using to make sure it doesn't lift the paint off. Now, with that in mind, I also use, and I recommend, and it's just my own opinion, but primer of some kind. I use Stynylrez, Ultimate Modeling Products, and I think MIG, Ammo by MIG. I think they use the same stuff. It's just bottled for them with their label, but it's all Stynylrez. It's a really good primer that really adheres to the model. If you can use a lacquer-based primer, that's even better because that really bites into the plastic. But I do recommend a primer, although it is not necessary. But I have found in my uses, if I'm not careful, especially using some of the water-based acrylics, if I mask over it and I haven't primed, when I lift the masking tape, it can peel the paint off the model. So those are all the materials that we're going to need to do the kit. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the kit itself for this project. Okay, the kit is Tamiya's Grumman F4F-4 Wildcat, kit number 61034, 148 scale kit. This kit came out in '94, I believe. I've read some reviews on it, and they're all been very good. So apparently it's a really good kit without much going on as far as fit issues or anything like that. So really nice kit. So let's take a look at what actually comes in the box. Again, this is geared for beginners, so I'm going to be talking about some stuff that a lot of people already know. In the instructions, and this is the same with pretty much any brand, you'll have, a picture of the kit and then some information on the actual aircraft or vehicle itself, different languages. On the inside, it gives you the recommended tools that they think you should have to do the kit, and that would be the bare minimums right there. There's also a list of the paints that you'll need. So you want to go through this and make sure you have either these colors or the equivalents in whatever brand you want to use. Then the instructions just give you your whole layout, step by step, which is the way I'm going to build it. I'm going to build it step by step, just like you know, most people do, without trying to jump around too much. So the last page, generally, or last couple of pages in this case, will give you the different color schemes and marking schemes that you can use for your kit with the stuff that's supplied. So in looking at the different color schemes, I think that what I'm going to be doing, just because of the added color, is this VF-41 aboard the USS Ranger in World War II. The reason I'm doing this one, I like the fact that it's got some extra color with the red dot in the US insignia here, and then it's got the red and white stripes on the rudder. That was really early war. They eventually did away with those multicolors on the tails and in the red dot as well, and went with a kind of a plainer looking markings. But I like the fact that, you know, there's a little bit extra color. So that's the one I'm going to be doing in this, and we'll talk about the decals here in a minute. But then there's another one right here on the back. And something else to consider, especially if it's a beginner kit, all of these schemes are two-tone. There's a light color underneath, and then there's a dark color up above. On this particular one, it's actually a tricolor scheme. There's dark, medium, and light. So you'll want to make sure that you pick something that you will feel comfortable with. All right, so that is the instructions. So after the instructions, the contents of the box are these things. First, we have the decals, and as you can see, this is the rudder colors I was talking about, and the red dots that go in the center of the national insignia. Tamiya decals, they generally work pretty well. Sometimes it can be a little thick compared to some other brands, but there's ways to work with it, and you know, early on, that's not something a person really wants to worry about too much. We just want to get the thing together, painted, with the decals on it, so we have a decent looking model. Then there are clear parts, and all the parts usually come in bags. I've already taken them off of all the other parts, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is the clear parts, the canopy and the windscreen, as well as a couple of windows that are on the lower part of the fuselage, gun sight, a few other clear parts. Then, as for the parts themselves of the aircraft, it comes in gray plastic. You got the fuselage parts. The detail's really nice. There's rivet detail. There's panel line detail. You got the propeller, the motor, front and back, cockpit parts. And, you know, the detail on these things is really nice, as you can see by this firewall right here. Lots of detail going on there. And then we've got the wings, drop tanks, and looks like landing gear parts. The nice thing about this kit is the lower wing is part of the fuselage as well, so it makes it really easy and really convenient for making sure that the wings are level and the right angles coming off of the fuselage. And then the upper wing portions just glue right on top of that. So that's the other sprue, and that is it for the sprues. The only other part is this one here. I cut it off so it wouldn't get damaged because it had a pretty fragile connection point here, sprue gate connecting it to the sprue, but is the cowling. And nice stuff. So the last thing I want to talk about on this kit before I wrap it up is one item that, if you can spring for an extra item, aftermarket type stuff, I recommend on aircraft canopy masks. So what these are is this is a F4F 148 scale 4 Tamiya kit. This is a masking set that is designed specifically for this kit to mask off the clear portions of the canopy so you can paint the framework when you paint the rest of the aircraft. So, you know, you got these individual paints with a framework, and it's really super hard to paint them with a paintbrush. And sometimes it can be a little tricky on some of them, making your own masks out of, say, masking tape or something. It can be done, and it could probably be done with this one here because the framework is really defined. So you'd have a nice straight edge to cut the masking tape to make it fit. But, you know, there's curves and stuff like that, and you run the risk of, you know, scratching the clear portions. So these here, they don't cost very much, and it saves a lot of headaches, especially for beginners. And then, you know, you can practice on sometimes you'll get extra canopies and stuff like that in a kit. You can practice on those doing making your own masks, and without having to worry about, you know, wrecking the one that actually goes on the kit. So if you can spring for something, and this is the only aftermarket part I'm using, just because I think it's beneficial, especially for beginners. It kind of takes a little bit of the headache out. So that's one thing that I would recommend you get if you can. So there you have it. That is the kit and the tools and supplies you'll need if you would like to follow along on this build of the Grumman F4F-4 Wildcat. So stay tuned. I'll be posting more videos. The next one will actually get into the building aspect of the kit, get everything prepped up, and start working on it. So as always, thanks for watching Plastic Models by a Regular Dude. And if you have any questions or comments before we get started on this kit, I'm going to post this video much sooner than I actually get started on the kit. That way, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, I can answer them in case somebody wants to follow along on this build. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and the Plastic Models for Beginners series. And stay tuned. We'll get started building this on the next video. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.